Welcome to Upfront Down Under. I'm Chloe Morgan.
And I'm Rachel O'Sullivan.
What was all the bloody worry about? England are through to another final after a cracking 3-1 win against Australia. It will be a first World Cup final since 1966 and obviously a first World Cup final ever for the Lionesses. We're back from the stadium and ready to talk about it all because so much was happening. I'm saying probably the best game of the tournament. Am I biased? Absolutely yes. Of course I am. 3-1. I mean, Rach, I don't want to jump straight into the feelings of it. I think before we even get into like the nitty gritty of it, obviously a very consistent starting 11. Nothing was changed from the last game. Felt like a bit of a return to Wiegman's finding form, sticking with that back three with the wing backs with Daly and Bronze pushing on. This seemed to be the right fit for this game. I mean, what did you think? That first half, I felt comfortable. I felt we were in control. We had the majority of the possession. I think the first 10 to 15 minutes, I thought were a little bit hairy. The balls were going over to Sam Kerr. And I think she did obviously have that one-on-one with Mary Earps really early doors. And that did seem to be like the, oh shit, is this going to go sideways moment? But it didn't. They stuck to the game plan and rode out that slightly, turbulent wave. But yeah, I mean, what were your thoughts on the first half?
I always find with these matches that it's the first kind of 10-15 minutes where you suss out the opponent and you're like, okay, is this going to be like an all-out gladiator battle where both sides are throwing everything at it, a bit like the Colombia game? Or are they going to, sit back a bit and you're going to have one team kind of impose their game plan? I felt like England's game plan was probably a bit more in charge, if that makes sense. Like there was a bit more to England's game plan, I thought, than Australia's. I thought England were a little bit maybe sloppy in possession just early on. I think it just took them a little while to get into their rhythm. But generally they looked comfortable. I thought with the three at the back, sometimes Australia were able to overload on the wings. So like your Catleys and your Fords or your Ellie Carpenters and your Hayley Rassos. And I thought sometimes it would happen that two of the back three would go to that and then kind of be a little bit exposed. But Australia really struggled to capitalise on those moments. So it just, especially the first half, it just never really felt like they were actually going to score a goal. They didn't have any goals on shots on target, I don't think, in the first half. So yeah, England kind of looked a bit more comfortable, and that's something we're starting to see now with them is even in those moments when it looks maybe a little bit hairy or a little bit nitty gritty, they have the composure to kind of see it out. I thought they did a very good job of breaking up Australia's rhythm. I thought Australia did that a little bit as well. It was like when the game was on, it was like 100%, like everyone 100 miles an hour, high tempo. And then when the ball went down, it was like, okay, let's just take our time. Take your time. You're going to take it slow. And so it was a real like really fast, really slow kind of moments. You'd have moments where you're like, it's like walking football, and other moments where you're like out of breath just watching it. So yeah, the first half had a bit of everything, I thought, but the goal massively kind of settled my nerves, I thought, and I did think England would see it out just from the way they were playing until Sam Kerr. Well, we can move on to that. Like Sam Kerr did her thing, but where do you tell me where you want to take this game dissection next?
I want to take it into the sphere of game management because I think that is where England have matured and excelled at this tournament. Like, we have ground out results. It's not always been pretty. It's been fucking hairy at times. But at the same time now, like we see England, playing the ball into corners or like hoofing it out into the crowd. Or Mary Earps was taking the absolute piss today. There was one that there was a goal kick on the 6-yard box that she carefully placed and then moved it a couple of inches and then stepped back and then went to replace it and then step back again, and meanwhile the Australian fans are going absolutely fucking wild. They're like, boo, boo, like giving her so much abuse, and I think the abuse spurred her on. And I think actually what England did really well today was turn the negatives, turn the crowd against them into a factor that motivated them. I was saying to in the blog in the Athletic, and I said it felt like England were really coming into this identity as a pantomime villain. This game, it was almost like they got off on the fact that they were breaking up play, that they were boofing it out, that they were, playing it into the wings to progress it upfield, or, all these game management tactics where you do just run down the clock. Like that goal just before half time, they knew that it was so important to see out that half on top. Australia trying to get that equaliser before half time, like we tried to do with Colombia in the last game, would have been an absolute no-go. It would have completely changed the face of the game. So those little game management tactics, frustrating the players, the amount of fouls that we had in that first half. I think there was like 8 fouls in that first half. Not great from Alex Greenwood, obviously picking up that very early yellow, which then I think there were concerns there. It was very blatant. But also, I think it was a tactical thing. I think she had to do that because Sam Kerr was making a very dodgy little run behind her and she was causing all kinds of threats. So I think sometimes you do have to take a hit for the team. And like credit to Greenwood, I think she's been absolutely outstanding this tournament and this game. So I think game management-wise, I think England, in that first half, they did like the little shits game management. It was just like those little horrible tackles, those like, pushing players into like the boundaries and like the LED boards, or like just going for those
that Lucy Bronze one.
Yeah, just little things like that to rile them, and you could see them getting riled. And I think that's why we ended up opening up a little bit of space at the back for then that Ella Toone goal. I mean, when you saw that Ella Toone goal hit the back of the net, I thought it just summed up everything that was just this about this tournament. Because out of all the people that you thought were going to save England today out of that starting 11, would you have put your house on it being Ella Toone, who's kind of been slightly absent, shall we say, or not grown into the games this tournament? Would you have put it on Ella Toone? Who would you have put to save the day today?
Probably not. And that's not only because Ella Toone's not had her best tournament, but I also think England just haven't been at their free scoring best, other than maybe the China game. So I don't know who the hell I'd put my house on to definitely score a goal. Do you know what I mean? Because there were times you're kind of sitting there going, where is it going to come from? So yeah, I wouldn't want to put it all on the fact that purely down to Ella Toone's performance. I think there's also the element that England just haven't been scoring as comfortably as maybe we would have expected from them. But yeah, I thought, like you say, that the narrative around the whole thing was obviously this historical moment for the Matildas. The fact that the whole country had gotten behind them, everyone was talking about it. It was all the rage, all the buzz coming into it, and kind of England just quietly going about their business, just going to quietly arrive in Sydney and just pop into the stadium here. Don't mind us. We're just going to come in and just play our part and hopefully ruin your dreams. No big deal, which is exactly what they did. And I do think like there has been a lot of narrative, because a lot of people don't like England. Fair enough. But a lot of narrative around like, yeah, but you haven't been playing well. And it's like, well, if your team's not playing that well and they're still getting through the rounds in the World Cup, do you care?
And not losing a game.
You're in the final. Do fans really care how their team get there, but they get there? Like, wouldn't fans rather have their team not play that well and make the World Cup final than, absolutely boss it, Japan, looking like they're probably going to win it, and then being kicked out in the quarterfinals? Like, it's not always perfect. And I think football has shown us that. And I definitely think this tournament has shown us that, is that football isn't always perfect. Teams who you expect to be excellent don't always play their best game every single game. And it's how you get through it. And I think that's what England have done. England have ground out this World Cup tournament. They've done whatever needs to be done within games to get through them. Whether that's not playing well, or whether that's, having to slow down games, which I hate, or, whether it's having to make loads of different changes. I think that's been key to how they've gotten through. And I think it's also a testament to the standard at this World Cup that going forward, teams are going to need to be able to do that. Like, in general, not just England, every team, they're going to have to be able to play different types of football. They're going to have to be able to win when they're not playing well. And I don't think that's ever really going to change that much now. I think as all of these teams get better, it's just going to get harder.
I mean, Steph Catley was amazing in the mixed zone. Very kind of like, reflective about what this experience meant for the Australian people, how it was going to take Australian football forwards, like the inspiration of young girls. And I thought that was amazing. And she spoke up a little bit about the lack of resources and like how she thought this was going to be a sort of provoking moment to try and get more funding for grassroots football going up. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, I know it's disappointing for them, but they've made history. Mm-hmm. Like, they have changed. Like, this country wasn't known as a soccer loving country. Like, you would be hard, like, you wouldn't land here yesterday and think that this is a country that wasn't interested in soccer or women's football. I'm calling it soccer because obviously football over here is AFL. Like, they have changed massively, brought people on board with them. We were having brunch just down the road from where we are here today, and there was 2 old ladies behind us. And all of a sudden the conversation turned to the match tonight. And I couldn't help myself but turn around and be like, oh, like, are you going to be watching the match? And then we started having a conversation about it. One of them was from Wales, one of them was from here, and how much they were looking forward to it. And they don't know now, like, I don't know if they're going to be able to beat England, but like, whatever happens, they've done so well. And like, our taxi driver was 70 plus and was like, oh yeah, it's going to be a tough match. Like, it's permeated so many different parts of society. Every coffee shop in Blackboard had, watch the Matildas here, watch the game tonight. Like, everyone was invested. And I know it's disappointing that they didn't get to the final and they didn't have their fairy tale ending, but that doesn't take away from what they have achieved, because it's massive, it's historic, and you know, they can kind of leave this tournament with their heads held massively high, as can Australia and New Zealand for the tournament that they've put on.
Massively. And I think, you know, obviously they were the only non-European side going into the Final Four. And I think I went to sort of a panel event just before the game started, and some of the Matilda staff were basically saying that where they wanted to get to for this World Cup, they had to really reflect and look at the experiences that these players were having. And a lot of the experiences were, you know, dealing with teams who are ranked sort of like 20th, 30th plus, 5th, 40th plus in the FIFA rankings. And the biggest focus for them in the last 2 years is playing teams that have been in the top 10. So they were saying, I think they've played every single team in the top 10 within the last 2 years, and like to get that experience of a higher grade of football, because like the European teams, the Norway, well, I would say Norway, but actually they completely underachieve every time that we come to a tournament, but the Englands, the Spains, the Germanys, like the Swedens, like these are all sides now that they are absolutely like going through and like they have experience of. Like this is I think it's that, like they didn't, for them to have made the final would have been a bonus. For them to have get where they are now is absolutely fucking outstanding. So yeah, and I think I've just been so impressed with the kind of fever surrounding the World Cup, like the vibes, like every time you get into a lift, there's a yellow shirt, you get into a cab, you're talking to the Uber driver about who they've seen there, you know, you're walking down the street and there's like an England fan, but like they're an England fan who lives in Australia, who's like an expat from somewhere else, or you know, the amount of like different, the community around it, and also just how it's another example also of how lovely a tournament can be. There's been no, like, I don't want to compare it to men's football, but I think the comparison does need to be made sometimes. Like the Euros had no violence, no aggression, there was no homophobia, there was no like vandalism, there was no police incidences. And we've seen exactly the same thing in another major international tournament. There was 75,000 people crammed into that stadium and everyone was good vibes. They might have booed Mary Earps, they might have like, you know, given a bit, the Colombians might have whistled every time the England team got the ball, but it was like all in good fun and all in good jest. And that has been the entire vibe of all of these tournaments, and people who have come into this tournament supporting England have been wearing Colombia shirts, and people who are Australian have been supporting England, and like, you know, it's just that, and everyone's been cheering, like even if you're from Japan, you're cheering other, it's just, it doesn't matter, like, and it's just you can just have a nice tournament where you support quality football rather than it just being, oh, I've got to stick to my side and that's it, because there's just been so many incredible moments in this tournament. So yeah, without getting really kind of like, you know, overly emotional, now that we're coming to the back end, the crunch time of the tournament, I don't want to shed a tear, but I do feel a little bit upset that we've only got 3 or 4 days left of this, because yeah, it's been a wild experience. Yeah, but we'll now, for the next podcast, we've got to talk about like some of our favourite moments. We'll do a bit of a roundup, because there's just been so many key, significant, funny, ridiculous times in this tournament that we all need to share. So, but if you've got any listeners, like if you've got any like ridiculously lovely things that you've like picked up on the tournament, any kind of lovely little anecdotes of, you know, people that you've spoken to in taxis or on the street, or clubs that you, or teams that you started supporting that you didn't support at the start of the competition, let us know, because we want to hear all your heartwarming, beautiful, lovely stories to finish off what has been the most incredible month of working on Upfront in Australia, down under. Yeah, it's just been absolutely incredible. And a big shout out to all the people who have come up to us in the streets and said, oh, like, love the pods, like we're really enjoying things. So like we absolutely appreciate you giving us that feedback, because that's always absolutely lovely to hear. So yeah, thank you so much for listening in.